We have a massive power, and it's the power to say no.
2024 is the year when the pushback begins in earnest.
People ain't seen nothing yet. That's what I keep telling people.
It is a master-servant relationship where we, the governed, are the masters.
Doctors are gaslighting patients.
You press down enough on people for long enough, you leave them no choice but to rebel.
So, no, I don't want to forget about it, and I won't shut up about COVID.
The story of the unvaccinated is still yet to be told.
We are one people, one flag, one Australia.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the XCandidates. My name is Stephen Tripp, joined by Adam Starr. We apologise for last week. We missed you, but there was a good reason behind that. But Adam, did you have a good week off?
Well, it was pretty nice actually to sit down and actually not have to come into the, the dungeon, the old garage, and film the video. But we like filming anyway, and I did miss it. And I'm kind of like, what do I do with my time? So Walking Dead, unfortunately, copped that. I ended up watching a lot of Walking Dead that night. Mate, congratulations.
Thank you.
So the reason why we missed it is we can go public with this, can't we?
Well, I went public on Commanding the Narrative last week,
Right.
so a lot of people know already.
Well,
But,
congratulations. Bringing
my
Max
wife-
on into the world.
Yeah, my wife gave birth to a little boy, so everything's going well so far. So all is well in the world here.
I'm going to come up and visit you soon. I want to come up and say g'day and squeeze his cheeks.
Yeah, he's a good little boy. G'day, Digger. Nice to see that you're with us tonight. We'll start off like we always do, but just by letting everyone know about Buy Me a Coffee. If you want to head to Buy Me a Coffee and throw us a few coffees and dollars, you are more than welcome to. A lot of people have been jumping on there to support us, so it's much appreciated. So please head to Buy Me a Coffee, and the link will be in the show notes and everything. I can never get these things to work. Sorry. Yes, but jump on there. We also got the t-shirt shop at the moment as well. If anyone wants to buy an XCandidates t-shirt, you can do that. We've got this design here. Just not there. We go. That's better. That's what I'm trying to do. So you can choose any color you want. You can play around with the colors here. We've got plenty of designs on there. It's also another way of supporting us as well. And Adam, we've also talked about if you happen to buy one of these t-shirts and get in front of a politician and invite them on the show, you can come on and guest host as well. That was one of your ideas, right?
Yeah, it was something like that. Mine was a bit more rough, not really as well thought out as that, but I like that, and we'll go with it. Yeah, all right, sweet.
Okay, well, that's the challenge for everyone out there. If you can get one of our shirts and line up a guest, they can be a notable person, a politician, an expert, whatever they might be. Get a photo with them and get them on the show, and you can come on and guest host. So how about that? I think that's a pretty good deal. Also, as well, let you know, we've been letting everyone know about this competition that's going on at the moment. It's the NREN photo competition. So just head to nren.com.au. Click on this link here for the chance to win $1,000. And if you do, you can submit a photo of renewable projects that's happening in your area, or one that you know of. You can make it funny like this one here. They put a little teddy bear in front of some destruction that's being caused due to an upcoming wind project or solar project, and you can go in the draw to win $1,000. No photoshopping, no editing. It has to be a real photo. But if you do have something in your area, or you know of something that you can submit, follow these details on this website, and you can go in the chance to win. So the entries will close at the end of this month, and it will be all announced on the 2nd of June. We've got an event coming up that I should be able to let you know about next week at the DYRSL, and tickets will be going on sale for that, but I'll give you more details about that next week. But on tonight's episode, this one's going to be a good one, because we've talked a lot about energy. We've talked a lot about renewable energy. We've talked a lot about nuclear energy, but we've never focused on coal. Coal seems to be given up on by all sides of politics, really. We've all moved along to the nuclear debate, but we've left coal behind, and some of us are not sure whether that's a good decision or not. So we thought we'd reach out to an expert and talk about this is actually a recommendation by one of our listeners, Sasha. So thank you, Sasha, for organizing this this discussion and talk tonight. But we have an electrical engineer, an energy system realist, and the host of the Baseload Podcast, Mr. Ben Beattie. Welcome to the XCandidates. Sorry, mate, you're just on mute. So there you go.
G'day, guys. Pleased to be here.
G'day, Ben. Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate you spreading your knowledge to our viewers and listeners.
No worries. Yeah, well, hopefully I can say something crazy that upsets a few people. Like, Cole generally does that as a topic, doesn't it?
Well,
it's very emotive, yeah. But what is your background, and how did you? I guess what led you to the Baseload Podcast?
Okay, so I'm an electrical engineer. When I left university, I started working for a control systems company, and that set me right into the power sector. And that was in the early 2000s. I spent a good decade in there in design, construction, commissioning, troubleshooting, all different types. So coal, biomass, diesel, a little bit of wind here and there, mostly on some compliance issues. Even a little bit of geothermal, to be honest, and some gas as well. So I've been around the traps a bit through the generation sector, and then I moved into the gas sector, which is where I am at the moment. So yeah, I'm not a player in the industry. I don't own my own company. I'm just an engineer. I draw a salary. So anyone who reaches out to me and says, "Oh, I'm just shilling for the industry," I don't think so. For example, if you think that the gas industry is worried about more renewables, I'd ask them to see what's happening in the world. And yeah, so I think I can hopefully give you guys some really interesting info tonight that maybe you haven't heard before.
So Ben, I've got a question then. Sorry, 1 second, Ben. Oh, sorry, 1 second, Stephen. So you're saying that the gas companies aren't worried about renewables?
Not at the moment. No, the gas companies, most of their demand comes from overseas, and overseas there's plenty of demand for gas. When you look at what's happening around the world, especially which was highlighted since the world tried to stop using Russian gas. I'm pretty sure a lot of Russian gas is still being used in the West, but the Ukraine situation really highlighted the world's dependence on gas. And that hasn't gone away. It's only increasing. So a couple of indicators of that would be Qatar. So they're always expanding their capacity. And I believe as only a couple of months ago, there was a big order for several new LNG tankers, which is an industry in decline would not be ordering new LNG tankers. There would be plenty already, right? Another interesting quirk in the mix is the US. So the US is really interesting in the gas sector because they have so much of it. They have plenty, and depending on who's in charge, they're not scared to develop it. Yeah. So the US could quite easily, under Trump, be the world's largest gas exporter. And I'm talking gas, whether it's pipeline or LNG. And so we can go into some of those differences too, if you like. But under a Trump leadership, and if he says drill, baby, drill, and, oil prices will go down and gas prices will go down, which is generally good for consumers, probably less good for gas companies. So yeah, the renewables globally are not reducing the demand on gas.
Now, your podcast, the Baseload Podcast, you can find it on Spotify. What do you talk about on there? Is it just all energy stuff, like just drawing upon your knowledge?
Yeah, it is. So everyone should have their own podcast, right, guys? Yeah, if you don't have a podcast these days, you know what's going on. My idea for the Baseload Podcast is because I was doing some writing for The Spectator and online, and that was going quite well. And then I think it was around about when Paul Broad, the former CEO of Snowy Hydro, I think he quit, and there was an audio grab, and because I play music, you see a guitar amp behind me over there, and there's some other stuff in this room that you can't see. I have a little bit of music editing software, Ableton. So got the full version of that. So what I can do is splice together clips and talk about it and have a bit of a chat. So I thought I'd give it a go, and that came out all right. So here I am, 23 episodes later, staring down the barrel of episode 24. If I wasn't talking to you guys tonight, I'll be working on episode 24.
Awesome. Now, you're in the electrical space, and I'm sure you understand the grid. Before this mad rush to renewable energy, what was our grid like? You hear stories of Australia having the cheapest energy in the world, and brown coal was at 3 cents a kilowatt hour. What was like? Did our grid, like, was it old? Did it need upgrading? Was it suitable for our needs? What was it like before all this started? Maybe give us an idea of where we're at.
Okay. Well, the grid is actually several grids put together, linked together from Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland primarily, with South Australia and Tasmania tacked on the edges. So when we talk about the national electricity market, that's what we talk about. It's evolved over time, so it wasn't always connected to each other. That happened sort of 1998 to 2000 is when this national electricity market, the interconnection happened, and it's grown from there. Before that, the states ran their own systems. There was no privatization. It was all government owned, and they operated their generators based on, well, the cheapest one ran the most, basically, from the bottom up, and the most expensive one was called on the least. So that would be your hydros and a bit of gas here and there. So, and the hydros and the gas are still the most expensive, and coal is still the cheapest, except for a couple of notable exceptions. So Victoria. So let's do them by state. So Tasmania and South Australia don't have any coal. South Australia blew up their last one, Northern Power Station, because 2016, 2017, somewhere around there. And there was reasons for that, but it could have kept going for another decade. Its mine was getting a bit low, but it was still a cheap source of electricity. The Victorian brown coal-fired power stations, so there's only 3 of them. There's Loy Yang A, Loy Yang B, and Yallourn. So they all have definite time limits on them now. Yallourn's subsidised by the Victorian taxpayers, so is Loy Yang A. Due to the economics. So we'll go through some of those economics. And Adam, a bit earlier, you mentioned that I know the grid, but I know what I know, but I'm also quite happy to say some of the things that I know I don't know, if you know that old Donald Rumsfeld phrase, which gets around. So we can talk about the things that I don't know as well, which are also quite interesting, I think. Another one is, then we get into the brown coal generators. So they are still cheap. So they're obviously built, they're operating, they're debugged, they do upgrades. So there's no real technical issues with these generators. They've still got, a long time to run if the operators chose to do it. Their coal is not exportable. It's not tradable. There's no rail line from those coal mines to an export facility to send the coal overseas. That doesn't happen in Victoria. So and they call that mine mouth or run of mine coal. And it's if the power stations are not there, that coal mine would be a stranded asset. So the mines serve the power station, and that's akin to basically digging up dirt and throwing it in the boiler. That's basically what they're doing, right? And there's no extra cost to that. There's no other factors. So the cost of operating the mine is the cost of the fuel. And in Victoria, that's almost literally dirt cheap. So when you say 3 cents a kilowatt hour, $30 a megawatt hour, well, I would say that in Victoria, you're more like the cost of fuel, the short run marginal cost of those generators, more around the $10 to $15, probably a third to a half of that 30. So that's Victoria. So in New South Wales, completely different story in New South Wales. New South Wales is rapidly turning into a mess. So they obviously have these big coal-fired generators. So Eraring is obviously in the news at the moment. Liddell was in the news until recently. They've got Bayswater, Vales Point, and Mount Piper. So take Liddell out, you've got 4 left, and Eraring is the next one to go. So of those 4 coal-fired power stations, what's slightly unclear is which ones are paying how much for fuel, because the entire coal system in New South Wales is focused on Newcastle to get the coal overseas. And there's a combination of and Illawarra as well. So you've got a combination of coking coal further south, and you've got thermal coal further north. Now, this is all export quality coal, most of it. So most of the mines are set up to dig the coal out, stick it on a conveyor belt. The conveyor belt goes to Newcastle, goes on a ship, and off you go. That whole coal transport network is chock-a-block, especially when the coal prices are high. So trying to get a bit of the local coal into that network that's full of other trains to try and send it to a power station can be difficult. So that's one of the challenges. The other challenges is a place like Eraring has reportedly some issues getting all its fuel. So this has been reported in the ABC a couple of years ago. They had one of their mines was, scraping the bottom of the barrel is how I would describe it, running out of coal. And what the reasons for that is, when you go back in history around about the privatisation of the New South Wales network, and you find out a little bit of info there when Origin got hold of it, and then you go back a bit further to when Eraring was built in the 80s. It was meant to be built with its own coal mine. And there's some information floating around, like environmental impact statements for that coal mine. You can still find online. They're basically typed up with an old typewriter, and now they've been scanned in, and they're in some, archive somewhere, but you can find them. And there's this environmental impact statements talking about this coal mine, which is needed to exist because the existing coal mines that supplied Eraring didn't have the capacity to feed it for its lifetime or at its full output. And this is still where we're at. So Eraring, looking at buying expensive coal that would otherwise be sent to overseas. So it could be buying export fuel at a much higher price than domestic coal. And that's the situation for 2 of the 4 power stations in New South Wales for sure. And it could be the same situation for the rest of them at certain times, depending on how much coal they want to have on hand. So then we come north to Queensland, which is a completely different situation again. So in Queensland, there's 8 coal-fired power stations. Let me see if I can get them right. Millmerran is fully privately owned. Then you've got a fleet of state-owned. You've got Cogan-Crete, Tarong North, Stanwell, Callide B, Callide C, what's that? And Gladstone. I think that's 8. Yep. Gladstone is some kind of public-private partnership. I'm not sure exactly what it does, but in that sense. But out of all those power stations, Cogan Creek has its own mine that's not connected to rail. So it's actually one of the cheapest power stations to operate in the world. No one talks about that in the news. Similarly with Tarong North, and the Callide units. So all that massive amount of generating capacity, and you're talking gigawatts there, is very cheap. That's in the order of $30 a megawatt hour. That stuff. You get to, and Millmerran as well. So when you get to a couple of the coal-fired power stations that may have to compete with an export market for their fuel, okay, there's times when they cost a bit more, but that's generally it. So out of all the 15 or so coal-fired power stations in the national electricity market, there's only a couple which have very high prices that can affect the market in that way. The rest of them, they could generate day in, day out, and you'd be $50, $60 a megawatt hour tops. And no one who knows what they're talking about is going to argue about that. If someone wants to argue about that, then yeah, let's have it. Let's get into the details.
And just for like so people can understand it, like what does a megawatt? How much does a megawatt power, like roughly, 10 homes,
Okay.
1,000 homes, 1,000,000 homes?
No, so like a megawatt is just the unit of instantaneous electricity. So a watt, named after James Watt, the invent. What did he invent? I can't remember. Was it the light bulb? Something like that.
Was it a light bulb? Yeah, it was a light bulb.
Someone will Google it and fact check it, hopefully, and I'll get fact checked in real time. That's fine. But what is a joule per second? And a joule is another famous person. So a megawatt is 1,000,000 watts. So that's the level of the bucket, and then the girth of the bucket, how many liters it has, that's your megawatt hours. So the megawatt hours is kind of the area under the curve. So if your generator is generating 1 megawatt and it's doing it for 1 hour, that's a megawatt hour. If it's generating 1 megawatt for 10 hours, that's 10 megawatt hours. Okay, so that's the maths are quite simple in that respect, but that's basically what it is. There's two numbers. There's how much it can do at any point in time, and there's how much it does over a duration.
Okay. So we're talking about mainly the grid was run on coal, which it really is now as well. I mean, there's still a lot of coal in the system, and we can talk about that a little bit later as well. So really, the whole push to change the grid is this push to renewable energy based on the idea that, we have global boiling now, not just global warming. But in your opinion, is it fair to demonize coal?
No, of course not. So, I mean, coal's an inanimate object. It doesn't do anything unless you get a human making it do that. Coal is keeping the lights on right now. We're sort of 8 o'clock, 8:30 at night time. If there's definitely no sun, if it's not windy, there's no wind power. And you don't want to be in Australia. Gas should be cheap, but it's not. And there's a whole raft of reasons why. And we may never fix it. We can talk about that as well. But coal, it shouldn't be demonized. It should be, well, I think it should be celebrated, to be honest. If you look at what's happened in Queensland recently, you've got Stephen Miles, the Premier. He's got an election coming up in October, and he's now busily trying to buy off voters. He just handed out $1,000 of electricity rebate to every single resident, every single electricity customer, $1,300 to, I think, small businesses as well. And he's boasting about the increased taxes he's put on the coal miners to pay for that. So if someone wants to have a go at coal, well, then I would say, okay, well, tell us all the bad things that you think that coal's responsible before. And once you finish that litany of, not much, I would suggest you talk about all the good things that it does, which is, powers our economy, powers our society, and makes sure we can, we don't have to live in caves.
What is a bad thing that coal is meant to do that doesn't?
Well, I would describe there are some issues with coal, as with burning any product. You have when you burn coal, it releases particulate emissions. So these, and nitrous oxides and sulfur oxides, these are genuine pollutants. I'm not talking about carbon dioxide. We could go into that later if you like. But
that's a pollutant.
Yeah. So when especially the old power stations like Hazelwood, the one that the Victorian government blew up in Victoria in 2017. So it was built might have even been built in the 50s or 60s. So its combustion technology and its exhaust filtering technology was of that era, and it had been upgraded slightly. But there's to me, that's the extent of it in the combustion side. After combustion, there's byproducts as well, like solids, which we call fly ash. Ash is a pollutant if it gets into the environment. And the way currently we manage that is we put big tailings dams beside these power stations. So there's a big dam. If you're going to build one now, it'd no doubt be a lined dam with multi layers of plastic. So that it would not have any potential of leaking through and all that good stuff. So that's a byproduct, which is, a consequence. It's a pretty benign consequence if it's controlled well. and managed, to be honest. I mean, it's not floating around in the air. It's not getting into the water. If it's managed well, I think that you could probably pull out instances where it's not been managed well, and those should be called out, and then we learn from those and we improve. So in that sense, you've got that.
You could say the same about. Sorry, mate. You could to interrupt, but you could say the same about wind farm technology as well. When they cut the blades up and just leave them in the forest or in some dump somewhere for them to leach the chemicals and all that kind of stuff out. So even if you're using renewable, green, safe, amazing technology, there's still mistakes and errors that are being made as we speak that we haven't even touched upon yet. So
yeah, of course there are. I mean, the byproduct of a wind farm is obviously its waste, its land use. Then you've got its other pollution activities, which is your visual pollution, and you've also got noise and light pollution, the flicker, the shadow flicker. So if we're going to do the pros and cons of power generation technologies, which I'm an advocate for that 100%, then people need to break into all these little nooks and crannies and dig out the good and bad, and then compare them fairly. Do it equally. Isn't equality a buzzword these days? Let's throw some equality around.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, you sent through this data. It's a YouGov poll, and this is the top issues facing households at the moment, and we can see right at the top there, people were asked to select a maximum of 3. So cost of living comes out at the top, and then crime and safety, and then housing affordability and availability. Down away is climate change, hovering around 11 to 18%, depending on when this poll happened. Do you think one of the big issues in this whole debate is that people just don't really care? They're not really that concerned about climate change and not really concerned about where our energy comes from. So in a way, it just flies under the radar almost. I know it is a big issue and it's talked about a lot, but for the everyday voter, do you think they just switch off when you try and argue with them about whether you're arguing for renewables or you're arguing for coal?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. One of the reasons I put it down to is talking about electricity and how it's generated and distributed and all the rest of it, and even how it's paid for is super boring, to be honest, and
yeah.
can get like really quite gritty in the details. Another reason is that a lot of people have been sold myths and misinformation by what some might say is reputable sources. I think if someone says that there's some other polls floating around, which I heard about, which also talk about the costs of it and whether people think renewables are cheaper or not. Most people are waking up to that because we've got more and more renewables, but the bills keep going up and up and up. But if you go and talk to someone in the street, why would people? Let me start that again. I don't think people should know what the next coal-fired power station to close down is. I don't think they should know who the head of the Australian energy market operator is. I don't think they should be. It's too much for something that's basically should be roads and gutters. I mean, we don't know who designs the roads in the streets. We don't know who the concrete company is that lays it. It's just overkill. What we need to be able to do is have a grown up discussion through the bureaucracy, through the politicians, and through the media, and through sort of outside commentators like myself.
But why is that not happening?
Well, this is the misinformation, right? So there's some pillars out there that underpin these theories. So one of them is the climate change stuff that we've touched on. Another one is that renewables are cheaper. So if you put those two together, it's a powerful message. If someone with some authority, a climate scientist or a wind engineer, whatever they are, says to you, well, listen, guys, the climate's in bad shape and renewables are the cheapest. And that's going to help. What do you think? And you'd go, oh yeah, sure. No worries. Unfortunately, that's just such a long way from the truth that it takes a long way to unpick those huge glaring emissions. in those stories.
Just speaking about like, cost and all that kind of stuff. So the politicians and, Chris Bowen and all, they're saying that, renewables are going to be the cheapest and it's the most efficient and cheapest way for net zero and all that kind of stuff. Do they factor in that they might have to replace whole wind farms or solar farms probably, 2 to 3 times in the lifespan of what a coal-fired power station would run?
No, some of them say they do, but almost without fail, and I'm happy to be corrected on this, almost without fail, the people who talk about this stuff are talking about the Australian Energy Market Operator, AEMO, talking about the Integrated System Plan, the ISP, and they're talking about the CSIRO's Gen Cost report. So between those two things, that's pretty much where the politicians stop. So they've been told that it's all good, keep going down these plans. They've got these 2 hefty reports by the reputable agencies, and that's enough for them. So there's been a lot of good work in the last, at least made visible in the last 12 months. Aidan Morrison talked himself into a job at the Centre for Independent Studies, which was a really good move by them. I think he's going to add a lot of value, and he's been unpicking Gen Cost and the Integrated System Plan in minute detail, which is sensational. A lot of us have been banging on about these things for a long time, but since they came out in around about 2018. But now that we've got, that's the one. Now that we've got a few people who are basically dedicated to the cause, this is their day job, and this is what's been missing, right? This is getting the information into the public realm in a reputable manner, in a respectable manner, in a way that tells the actual truth of these things. Now, the next step is going to be, well, what do we do about it? How do we turn the ship around, which is a hell of a thing as well.
Yeah,
absolutely. We need to get
you
this
spoke of
into politicians' hands. Sorry. Okay.
You spoke of misinformation before. There was a post by Tanya Plibersek recently that Colin Boyce kind of refuted. This is the post by Tanya. This is for the Mount Hopeful wind farm. And you can see this nice photo here. It says it's going to power 240,000 Queensland homes. And you might not be able to see it on the screen, but down here in this little font, it says the Mount Hopeful wind farm. Well, that doesn't look like a mountain at all. It looks like a nice big flat piece of land there. And the Colin Boyce, who's a member for Flynn in Queensland, posted this photo. This is what actually Mount Hopeful is. So they're planning to put wind farms on this area of land, which you can see.
Pristine, beautiful piece of land.
And not totally accessible either. I mean, blatant misinformation. They're talking about introducing a disinformation bill, but they're the ones spreading it themselves.
Yeah, I'm glad you pulled this one up, Steve, because this was a classic. And you talked about we were talking about how people sort of get on board with the whole process of renewables are better for the environment, all the rest of it. But when the environment minister themselves is presenting an image of a future wind farm built in cleared treeless plains, and yet the thing's actually going to be clearing trees in hills. I mean, come on, they've got to be something to say about that, surely.
Well, it's happening already, not in that particular case, but in other cases. I mean, this is an example here that Colin Boyce also posted. I mean, there's plenty of images out there. Stephen Nowakowski up in Queensland, he's doing a lot of fabulous work as well. But you can see the land clearing that has to take place in these pristine areas. I mean, it's bad enough clearing land in any area. Like, there's a lot of agricultural areas that are getting cleared as well, because it's not only the wind farms that have to go up, and you can imagine how big the solar projects are as well, but it's all the transmission lines that have to crisscross just to get out there. Like, these are in the middle of nowhere.
It is a hell of it's a blight on the landscape for sure, in my opinion. I would suggest that you've got each tower is going to have somewhere around 600 cubic meters of concrete in the bottom and a couple of 100 tons of steel. So yeah, you can see them clearing.
Yeah.
No impact on the environment there. But there's the roads that they need to construct it, and you mentioned the transmission lines. So it is a significant impact. The other impact it has is when these wind turbines are spinning, there's the effects on the flora, on the fauna. So if you've got bats or if you've got eagles, people say, oh, there's more pigeons flying to glass buildings, but you could lose a couple of million pigeons a day and the ecosystem won't notice. But if you lose all your bald eagles or your wedge-tailed eagles or your kites, then you have a much bigger impact on the system, right?
Yep. And that's what I don't understand, where the greenies are on this kind of thing. Where's animal justice and these kind of parties on this topic? Because
the amount Greenpeace, WWF, ACF, animal justice parties, where are the Greens party themselves?
Yeah. Because we can't get a road built because of bloody koalas. And look, I love the koalas, don't get me wrong. I should have probably said bloody, but we need some roads built, and it's in koala populated areas, and disease-free koalas, and it's just been an endless nightmare for as long as I can remember. My whole life, we're trying to build these roads in my area where I live, and everyone's like, "What about the koalas? What about this? What about that?" Well, you leveling pristine bushland which would have native species in it, and why aren't they talking about that?
Yeah, it's a good question.
The next part of that, when we were seeing the land clearing now, but there's a lot more to come if they want to go to net zero. I mean, the Teals are talking about a 75% reduction in emissions and all this sort of stuff. This is the AEMO website. This is a daily update, almost an hourly update of where the energy is coming from in each state. We can see here in New South Wales, 76% is still coming from black coal. So if to remove that, that's a hell of a lot of land that needs to be cleared for wind farms and solar. I keep calling them farms. They're definitely not farms. Wind projects and solar projects. So that's New South Wales. This is Queensland, even more, 84%. So, I mean, we're still heavily reliant upon coal. Do you have an idea of how much land that would have to be cleared if we went to completely solar and wind power?
Not off the top of my head. I have been going to the EPBC portal, which is anyone can look at, and I stuck a thing up on Twitter today. What I did was I downloaded you can download the whole database, which gives you every Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act submission since 2000, I guess, since it was set up, and you can download it into a spreadsheet and filter by various things like your states and your renewables, etc. Yeah, there you go. Well done. So if you look at the graph on the right with the blue bars and the line, that's the blue line is the purple line is a cumulative submissions. This is just renewable energy submissions since 2000, and you can look at the acceleration. And this is only in the last couple of years as these high percentage renewables targets have hit the system. So obviously those targets are generating a response. So when you go and tell the world and all the developers that you have these massive targets, you're going to get a lot of applications. Now there's something like 60 something renewable applications, wind applications in Queensland since 2016. Now, how many of those are going to get built? Well, that's a good question, but every single one of them has that kind of footprint that you showed before in those images. And then it's not just the I guess you'd say the construction impact. It's the ongoing impact for 20 odd years and on the environment. And then what do you do with it afterwards? You don't dig up 600 cubic meters of concrete and 300 tons of steel out of every wind turbine and take it away and recycle it. You just cover that up. And that's probably fairly benign. But you can't reuse those bases unless you put something smaller on them. Because if you think about how it works, all your wind tower stands up and it pushes at the top. So it's designed for those loads. If you try and put a bigger wind turbine on the same base, it's not designed for those loads anymore, is it? The loads are different. So you can't reuse them. And if you try and repower them, if you put more power through it, maybe at the same height, then all the cables and transformers need to be changed as well. So you've got a lot of, I guess, companies, I think, making a quick buck because they can build these things, get the short-term benefit for their incomes, especially when they get guaranteed returns courtesy of the government. And that's what I think is this capacity investment scheme. I think that's what it's meant to do. And then you have, lots and lots of these projects. So I think I've heard Steve Nurikowski say that the Great Dividing Range in Queensland is going to be basically end to end with these wind turbines, and that's in pristine sort of national parks and forests, which you can't really use for anything. It's just a nature reserve now. But then you also have solar farms on the flat plains. There you go. You have solar farms on the flat plains, which is agricultural land. So there's a really interesting video of if you see a solar farm up close, I'd urge your viewers to take a drive one weekend and find your nearest one. There's enough around, and go and have a look at actually how big it is, and then tell me if you can run sheep and cows underneath it, like some of these people say. It's not going to happen.
Hey Ben, I've got a quick question for you then regarding you made an interesting point about that the companies are they're putting in their applications now because they can make a quick buck. It's all price capped or whatever. They're going to make their returns through the taxpayers' coffers. In 20 years' time, when those wind farms, let's say you get 20 years out of your wind project, okay? Because we know that after 10 years, you've got to change blades. We've seen photos and images of them burning down, catching fire, breaking, freezing, all that kind of stuff, right? So let's say we're real lucky. We're in the land of luck, Australia. You get 20 years solid out of these wind projects. All the subsidies and all that kind of stuff start to dry up because, we've moved on or whatever. We've realized the failures of the systems. What happens? What will those energy companies who have built those and outlaid all that money and got all the returns from it? What happens to the solar, the wind turbines and stuff then?
Okay,
when they're finished, when they've expired.
I've looked. What that'd be is a decommissioning plan. And you would expect to see that in the environmental impact statements where it talks about the life cycle of these projects, that, chapter 12 or whatever it happens to be talks about how do you take them away when they're finished. This is the same thing that has to happen for every other power station, a coal-fired power station. You want to build a coal-fired power station, you got to tell the government how you're going to strip it down and clean it up at the end. If you want to build a mine, in Queensland, at least, you have basically an escrow payment for the rehabilitation in case you build the mine and then you go bust. Well, there's money there to fill it in and make it something useful, right? So, but these renewable projects don't have any such fallbacks. I'm really interested to see how one of the earliest wind farms in Queensland, which is up at Ravenshoe. It's Windy Hill. It's a small one. It's only about 12 megawatts, but it's coming to the end of its life, and it's changed hands several times. So it really and there's no decommissioning plan that I can see. It's owned by Ratch, I believe, which is a company from Thailand, and they're a reputable company. There's no problem with that. But is there any obligation on them to spend 10, 20, $30 million pulling those towers down, tidying up the tracks, pulling out the cables, the underground cables, and getting rid of the transformers and all those things? I'm not sure. I would love to know. I think we're going to find out in the next couple of years.
I'll tell you what I'm predicting for this. Okay, is that the companies are going to go, we provided you your green energy. Okay, now we're walking away from it, and it's up to you to fix. That's what I.
So from what I've heard, wind farms that are built on agricultural lands are farmers are paid X amount of money per wind farm per year to have these wind farms on their land. What's happening is these companies are coming in, they're building the projects, then they're selling it off to another company, and as Ben alluded to, maybe they'll just walk away at some point. the decommissioning may fall onto the farmers. So these farmers that are hosting the wind farms on their land may end up having to foot the bill for the decommissioning.
Yeah, there's a possibility of that. I'm not entirely sure. Like, I think most of the proponents who are developing these are fairly reputable companies at the start. I think, but I'm not sure if any of them intend to be owning a 25-year-old wind farm. I think that's an interesting question, right? So what happens later? Does it just get sold off or what? And then who owns it? Is it a less reputable agency from somewhere that, you know, we have no fallback on legally as a government anyway? When you look through the EISs for environmental impact statements for some of these projects, and it does talk about decommissioning, there is a few lines in there which talks about they're usually like a pro forma sort of paragraph because they're all very similar. It talks about there'll be an agreement made with the landowner at the time by whoever owns the project at the time. And that what they say is that they'll take the towers down, but the bases and Latin left behind, and they'll talk to the landowner about anything else that they need to do. So whether that's that to me, that leaves the discussion open to, well, if you've got a wind farm or whatever kind of project, might be a solar farm, gets turned off, and the owners want to end their project, whatever that's called, and get out of it, then whoever the landowner is could well be talked into accepting a payout and then leaving the stuff there. And that means that the landowner might not be in the best position to make those kind of decisions. Like, they might not know enough about it, and the money might be attractive. So there might be some really unfortunate decisions made in those times. I'd much prefer if those processes were set out up front, much like mining is, so that you're not left with a cluster bomb at the end of it.
Well, I work in construction. I've seen demolition work, and you look at the bases for these wind towers and how much steel and how much concrete goes into these things. They're not going to be cheap to demolish these things. I mean, I guess maybe the best option is just to cover them up and forget about them, but you can't farm on that land anymore, I can't imagine, or do anything. You just have this little mound sitting there.
Yeah, no, it'll be covered over. I imagine it'll be a couple of meters underground. But you're right; it's a big thing. So people make a big noise about nuclear waste, but nuclear waste, as it happens, isn't really a problem. It's stuck in, multi-lined steel and concrete casks, giant milk bottles, and stored above ground or underground. And there's, as far as I'm aware, there's never been of the waste that's packaged like that, there's never been an accident at all.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I wanted to talk about that. This is something that Adam had made up. Now, we've focused on nuclear energy a lot in previous episodes, and this Coke can represents the amount of uranium that would be allocated to each person to power a nuclear plant throughout their whole lifetime. So for my life, this is the amount of waste that would come out of a nuclear plant to power for my energy contribution throughout my whole life. I'm interested. We've talked about the amount of land that needs to be cleared for wind projects and solar projects, but going back to coal, what's the coal density like? Like, if we take that Coke can and that's the allocation of waste that's attributable to each person for nuclear, what is it for coal? We hear about long mining and these big open cut mines. But then they say we've got 1,000 years worth of coal sitting there in the ground. How much needs to be dug out each year to power maybe a city or a town or something like that?
Okay, so to give you an example, I'm trying to say the word example. An example of the area of one. People should go on to Google Earth and look for Traralgon, which is in Gippsland, the Latrobe Valley in Victoria, and find the Loy Yang A and Loy Yang B coal-fired power stations. And there's a damn big hole in the ground right beside them. You can run around that. Well, I ran around that mine from end to end on the public roads, and it was 25 kilometers it took me to get around it on the roads. And obviously that's not up to the edge. Coal mines that run for that long are big industrial sites. There's no doubt about it. Anyone who looks at an aerial image of the Hunter Valley, where they have the big open cut coal mines for export, it's a pretty confronting sight, to be honest. But when you think about what that coal is doing for the world, well, then you need to put it into context, right? So it's hugely productive. It's making millions of tons of steel every year. It's making millions of megawatt hours of electricity every year all over the world, and it's paying a hell of a lot of royalties and taxes into our state and federal governments. It's also employing a lot of people who pay taxes, who buy things, who educate their kids and buy houses and buy cars. It also has a lot of side industries, your switchboard makers, your maintenance companies, your brownfields contractors, all that kind of thing. So the hole in the ground, to me, represents more than just the environmental part. There is an element of sacrifice to that, but it's also not going to last forever. So those big coal mines, we should accept that, yes, we've made a sacrifice, but what we want to do is we don't want that sacrifice to be diluted. We want that spot to provide as much energy as possible without going any further. So I would say to people who don't like the Hunter Valley coal mines and things, and say, well, okay, let's just switch it all off then, shall we? What do you think is going to happen? Well, the people that want the coal might go and get it somewhere else, from the Amazon maybe, or from the forests of Indonesia, or from China, although there's not that much. There's plenty of coal in China, don't worry. And where those countries don't pay very well, they don't pay any taxes or royalties, and they don't have any environmental concern, no stewardship at all. So in Australia, obviously, very visible, very politically touchy, and I think the way to treat it is to accept that we're a big quarry at times, but we should say that, okay, we can take that. We can do the best job of it, because if we don't do it the way we do it, someone else is going to do it a hell of a lot worse and make a much bigger, much worse impact on the environment.
But just to follow up with that, but size-wise, right? So we know that a 375 ml can of Coke of uranium will power a person's life from birth to death. Would a trailer load of coal power somebody's life from birth to death? Would a truckload?
Oh, no.
Like what size?
No, a lot more than that. Like the density of uranium's off the charts, like almost literally off the charts. You couldn't put it on, if you did it to scale, you couldn't put it on the, it'd be one of those, if you try and draw the distance from Earth to Pluto to scale compared to Earth to the moon, you'd have to go, 2 states over to draw it. No, uranium is incredibly energy dense. So coal is good. Oil's better. That's why we also use a lot of oil in the world.
And so is LNG.
LNG is not bad. Yep. But it's a little bit harder to move around than oil. It's a little bit less stable and more prone to blowing up. Not as prone to blowing up as hydrogen, though.
That's right.
But the energy density. So I think I don't know, those power stations in Latrobe Valley and the coal-fired power stations in Australia, like they're putting through a couple of million tons a year of coal through their boilers. Yeah, easy. Each of them.
Yeah.
Less these days, because they're not generating as much electricity as they used to. But like I said, I go back to the point before. We already have these assets, and if we maintain them, refurbish them, we don't need any more holes in the ground. We have the hole in the ground. Deal with that. Use it, and benefit from it.
And if the government invested the kind of money that they've been investing in this renewable net zero plan back into coal-fired power stations. Let's not worry about nuclear because we're talking about coal tonight, right? But if they invested some of that money, would they be able to, obviously the technology for coal-fired power station could be developed. We could get more bang for our buck out of each kilo per coal, recapturing systems and reburning, some of the ash or whatever it is. Surely if they invested in making what we had better than trying to create a new system, we could get more efficient and maintain a lot lower pricing.
Yeah, you're right. And that's exactly what countries like Japan and Korea do. So they don't have any energy resources of their own. So every megawatt of electricity they make, the primary fuel comes from somewhere else via ship. And that's why they are quite happy to develop more efficient technology, which is your high efficiency, low emissions, your HELI power stations. So the problem that I have with that, and I don't have anything against the technology, just I don't actually have anything against wind and solar technology, to be honest. I'm more opposed to the rules that force them into the grid when the market and the grid doesn't want it. But on the coal, the reason you need to get more efficiency is to reduce the cost, because you've got to ship the stuff in. In Australia, if we have the space to not and the resources, we don't have to ship anything in. So my argument along the lines of coal is that we don't need to develop or use the most expensive generator technology, coal generator technology. We should be using the cheapest generator technology, because we have so much of the coal. We have hundreds of years of this stuff. Basically we can't ever run out, because eventually at some point everyone will go to nuclear power. There's no doubt about it. But we have, it's like the $64 million man. We have the technology. We've been using it for 30 years now, 40 years in some cases. That one of the newest power stations in Australia is Cogan Creek in Queensland. So it's about 400 kilometers away from where I'm sitting, and I'm perfectly okay. It hasn't killed me yet. But it's the biggest single unit power station in the country. It's 750 megawatts, and one of the cheapest, one of the cleanest. But it's nothing fancy. It's I think it's a super critical by the technology, and there's some designations that they use for the steam turbines and the boilers based on pressure and temperature. Now, as you get up to higher pressures and higher temperatures, your steel materials need to get more exotic to deal with those kind of pressures and temperatures. So you can imagine that as you get into these different alloys, the raw stuff actually costs more. Yeah. You've got a lot more of it because at those pressures, your wall thicknesses are a lot higher. And if you've ever talked to anyone who's a specialist welder, I'm fortunate enough to have talked to a couple and know a couple, then it's a hell of a job. It's a very technical job to weld thick steel together and have it work. Then it gets X-rayed and all the rest of it. So it's highly technical. And when you're doing all those highly technical things, the cost goes up. And so this is one of the things in CSIRO's Gen Cost, where they talk about the costs of coal-fired power. And then they use the most expensive, advanced, ultra supercritical boiler technology that's in the world. I think there's only a couple of them in existence at the moment because they cost so damn much to build and operate. And there's no point doing that here. We should just be using the cheapest, easiest, lowest cost coal-fired power stations, of which we have a really, really good experience on. We've got a dozen of them operating already.
And they don't pump the pollutants, like you were saying, directly into the atmosphere anyway, right? So if you had
no, there are some. Yep.
Oh, they are just so they just burn, and that's it. There's no filters or anything like that.
Well, there are limits. So we have an EPA kind of arrangement here in each state, Environmental Protection Agency type thing. So there's limits, and these combustion products are continuously monitored in the stacks in the big exhaust pipes. So and if there's breaches, then the companies get fined. And of course, it's entirely possible for those thresholds to be ratcheted down and down and down to less and less and less over time. There's nothing wrong with that. So when you go to build a power station, those kind of things come into the technology. So it depends on the fuel you're burning, the oxygen content in the boiler, that determines the temperature you're burning it at, and the quality of and how you manage it. So then you might want to pre-treat your fuel, get some moisture out of it, so that it burns a bit drier, so you can drop the oxygen content a bit more and you can control it a bit better. And so then you get less and less stuff out the exhaust. And then you have your filtration and the things, like you have a catalytic converter in your car exhaust, where you have similar things in these power stations. So what actually goes into the air is a tiny amount of stuff compared to what's actually going into the boiler. But it is something.
Okay.
You can just on that, you can actually go on to Victoria's got a really interesting air monitoring website. You can actually go on and look at the air quality in the cities, and in Traralgon, where all the big coal-fired power stations are, the dirty brown coal-fired power stations.
Yeah.
And you can look at it from day to day, and you can check and see if your people sitting in the traffic at a standstill sucking on each other's exhaust pipes are any better off than the people out in the Latrobe Valley, within a kilometre of the biggest brown coal-fired power stations in the country, and see who's got the better air quality.
See, the problem is you got people walking around saying that carbon dioxide is a pollutant. So
yeah, that's you got to look up the definition of pollutant then. I mean, geez, people walking around nude in the streets is a pollutant because no one wants to see it, do they?
I believe it. Well,
depends.
It depends.
Well, look, I've been dying to bring up this article because I think this is a brilliant article. This was by Matthew Warren. It's a little bit old now. It's from November last year, but he's talking about rooftop solar and the consequences of having rooftop solar. A lot of the times, rooftop solar is celebrated, and it's almost as if there's no drawbacks to it. But he says in this article, the biggest hurdle to building a massed renewable engine to power our economy is the growing fleet of renewables already installed, because they all run at the same time. So as you can imagine, when it's sunny, all the solar panels are running. When it's windy, all the wind farms are turning. And then he goes on to say, these headwinds are already materializing relatively early into the renewables adventure. Almost every day, 3.4 million rooftops generate more than 10,000 megawatts at their midday peak. This creates chronic oversupply, sending wholesale electricity prices negative. This means the value of any additional electricity from solar panels or other sources is beyond worthless to the grid. To manage this growing daily oversupply, every other type of generator that can is curtailed, turned off, or dialed back. So basically, with all this surplus wind and solar energy, all the other power generators have to be either turned off or dialed down. Coal generators are dialed down as low as possible, but still on to supply the evening peaks as the sun sets. So you have to keep coal running, because eventually the sun will go down, the wind will stop blowing, and you will need coal. The biggest hit is on the utility scale wind and solar farms, who are having their generation increasingly curtailed during the daytime. They earn less and less revenue from the same capital outlay. This pushes up the cost of electricity they produce and makes new projects less and less profitable. In other words, small-scale renewables are cannibalizing the market for large-scale renewables. The more we build, the harder it is to build more. So we're moving to net zero. We're building more and more renewable projects. But this article is saying the more we build, the less cost effective they are and the more problems we're having.
Yeah, I remember that one. Matthew Warren's actually quite good. He has a book that he wrote a couple of years ago. And it's not called Look at Us, How Well We're Doing. It's called Blackout. So he's been as realistic as he can, I guess he's got pressures from inside his bubble as well. What he's saying is absolutely correct. So you've got rooftop solar comes on during the day, and Australia has a lot of it, especially like in any metric, in gigawatts, in per capita, in whatever. There's plenty of it. And of course, when it's all, if you take a place like South Australia, remember, everything's interconnected between the regions. Now, the capacity of that interconnection matters. So it's not infinite; it's a certain amount of megawatts. Now, South Australia, it's at times, and you might have seen this in the media over the last couple of years, they're entirely powered by rooftop solar, and which is partly true. The rooftop solar was generating as many megawatts as the state was consuming. That's true to say. But you also have other things going on, like wind farms and gas and batteries as well. So the problem with rooftop solar is when there's so much of it, it's got to be on, because you can't turn it off. With your large wind farms and solar farms, gas, coal, whatever, it's connected into the market operator's control system, and they're what they call their dispatch engine, which is just the control system which monitors the frequency and then says, I need a bit more, a bit less. And that happens every 5 seconds. That signal goes out to all the participants and it tells them what megawatts to generate at, which is kind of tricky with wind and solar. They have to kind of guess that one. But the coal and hydro and gas, they can do whatever they're asked of, 99% of the time. So, but rooftop solar, that's an impossibility. Rooftop solar just has to be there. And if you have got to the point like South Australia where you have more rooftop solar than you can, or output at times, then you have more rooftop solar output at times than you can actually consume. So where does it go? And what do you have in the background for when the clouds come over? So these are the kind of questions that have to be grappled with in time frames of seconds and minutes. This is not something you plan for next week and then wind up your coal-fired power station and say, we're ready. No, this has to be there, sitting there and waiting. So when Matthew Warren's writing that rooftop solar is a problem, this is the kind of problem we have. And the way the market operator looks at it is they look at their minimum demand. So the demand that they see is the output of all the grid scale generators. So they don't know if you're going to turn your oven on. They don't know if your air conditioners come on or off. They don't know if a mine started a drag line or, whatever. They can only see the frequency and the voltage, but the frequency is almost instantaneous across the system. That's why it's such a good thing to use. That's why we've evolved into looking at the frequency. So you manage the frequency and everything should be apples. So what happens if you have minimum demand on the system? You have a situation where the generators are all backing out to make room for something else. It looks like everyone's turned everything off all at once during the day, but what's actually happening is the sun's shining and the rooftop solar is meeting all the demand, so everything else has to wind back down or put it somewhere else. The somewhere else is the interconnectors. But what happens when the interconnector is full and you still have too much rooftop solar? That's when you start getting into some really interesting territory. I call it interesting because it's not going to affect me directly, but the people in South Australia should be calling it very worrying, because if a cloud comes across and your system's full and you're not able to get something started in time to meet that gap in the actual supply, well, what'll happen is your frequency will dip and your voltage will dip. And if you don't get supply on to meet that, the only thing the operator can do is start turning things off in a large scale. So we're talking suburbs and regions, and they do that through the substations. That's called under frequency load shedding. Now that is a last resort for the operators, because that means people get on their mobile phones and they go, where's my electricity? I want to watch Neighbours. Well, I got to stream Neighbours from some American company now.
Yeah.
We've lost that too.
Yeah.
Maybe Home and Away. I want to watch Home and Away and the TV's not on. What are you doing? So this is the questions they're going to be grappling with, right? So this is what is coming for the rest of us. So the rooftop solar is a technical problem in some areas, but it's an economic problem everywhere else. So Matthew Warren also mentioned that as the other generators back out, they're not generating any electricity at a positive dollars. It's all at negative and $0. So there's a lot of questions about how that works exactly. And I think a lot of it is pretty confidential in terms of contracts and things like that. But what we can say is that you've got two mechanisms for paying for electricity at a wholesale price. You've got the wholesale market, which is the one you see up and down, the negative prices because during the day and the peak prices at nighttime. But you've also got a contract market, and a lot of the early wind and solar farms were just sold on fixed price. They don't care what the market is. They get paid no matter what. So the market is not able to tell them, those big generators, to back out. They don't care. They will offer their electricity into the AEMO's control system at the floor price at minus $1,000, just to make sure that they generate, because they get paid on megawatt hours. It doesn't matter what the market's doing. They get paid if they're generating. A lot of other generators, I think, are only some of it's contracted, sort of maybe 60 to 80%. So they actually, if the price is negative and they're forced to stay online, they're paying somebody to generate. So they're paying for fuel, paying for labor, paying for all that operations and maintenance, etc. And they're being fined for staying online, basically. So this is the economic problem, which is eroding the baseload generators as well. And it's not an easy thing to fix, to be honest. If you think about how that works, and I've been talking to people and thinking about it a lot myself, there's a lot to unpick, and it's going to need some politicians with some big balls to do it, unfortunately.
When you think about these issues, does it frustrate you? Like, we didn't have to go down this path. We could have kept the grid that we had without starting with all this push to renewable energy and rooftop solar and wind farm technology and blah, blah, blah. If we just kept it like it was, like, we wouldn't have to face all these issues.
Well, that's partly true. Another thing that is true is that your big baseload generators will eventually get old. And what do you do then? Well, it's perfectly reasonable to refit. You can change pumps, you can retube boilers. Upgrading a 50-year-old power station with a new turbine and a few things, have a 2-year outage and boom, it comes back and it's brand new. There's no mine to develop. There's no rail to develop. There's no power lines to develop. There's no land to clear, and all of a sudden you've got this new, more efficient, cheaper to run thing. Okay, you got some capital to pay off, but nothing like a new power station. So there's nothing wrong with refurbs. It happens all the time.
Yeah, but it's not going to cost trillions of dollars like what they're spending on to do that. How much would look roughly? Just how much would it cost to refurb a power plant anyway? $100 million max?
Yeah, probably per unit. Yeah, maybe 200 in this day and age where everything's going up. But if you said that, if you spent you were going to refurb, say, instead of, say, Liddell would have been a good example, right? So it was originally, when it was built in the 70s, 2,000 megawatts. I think about the last decade or so, it's only been up to a maximum of about 1,500 because it was derated, because they didn't want to operate it at the higher capacity pressures to get and temperatures to get the final megawatts out of it. So they took it pretty easy as it died out, and I think they're probably using one of the units for parts by then too. But you're right. It's if they decided to refurbish Liddell, that might have been a 2 or 3 year project with a bill of 500 million to $1 billion, say. Like, call it $1 billion. Okay, but that's 2,000 megawatt power station, maybe more after they finished. That's cheap. That's cheap compared to everything else.
Mm.
If you're looking at the what is it? Is it MacArthur Wind Farm? I think you're looking at $1.5 billion for about 500 megawatts.
Mm.
Someone needs to fact check me on that because I just pulled those numbers out of my ass.
Well,
but it's nowhere near it. Yeah.
That's what I mean. So what happens is, but it's kind of almost predictable too, right? So say you've got what 20 coal-fired power stations going. Okay, we know we've got some at the 50-year mark. We've got some at the 20-year mark. We know that we're gonna we know that the 50-year ones, because I think it's about, they run from, when I remember when I was doing federal stuff, I think from 50 to about 80 years, I think you can run like these power plants, right? And let's say, so all right, so build another one. Have it, all right, so 5 years, you obviously you can go and assess the boilers, the pumps, all this kind of stuff. You can go, right, well, we've got around about 3 or 4 years left. It's going to take 3 or 4 years to build another one. Let's build another coal-fired power station now, okay? And then what happens is we'll turn that one on when this one's just about finished, and then we'll refurbish this one and have that one as a spare so that we can go on to the next one. You know what I mean? Like you can kind of predict that kind of infrastructure. You know what I mean? Like you could do something like that. Well, I don't understand, and then instead they blow them up and demolish them and get rid of them.
Yeah, so a lot of that's political, but there's also a piece of the puzzle that we need to consider, which is the privatization versus the government role. So all of these power stations, apart from Millmerran in Queensland, were all built by state governments. Now, I don't, talking about subsidies and things, I don't call that a subsidy because there was no market. No one benefited except the taxpayers. There's no industry assistance in a state government starting an electricity system, right? But the subsidies given to the renewables and things these days flies in the face of the market principles. So that's something to talk about. But you've got for someone to drop $1 billion on anything, they need to borrow some of it, and they need to make a return at the end of the day. Now, when you look at the environment that we're in for the last 20 years here in Australia, who's going to lend money to build a fossil fuel project? Who's going to lend money to build a baseload power station when every state government and federal government policy is forcing more rooftop solar on roofs with the problems outlined in Matthew Warren's article? Who's going to do that? Nobody's going to do that. So whether it's baseload of any type, coal, or unfortunately nuclear as well, it's an incredibly difficult environment for anybody to say, boom, I'll go build one. Let's do that. I don't think even Clive Palmer could do it if he wanted to. I think he's unless he funded it out of his own back pocket, but I think his board would probably say, no, find me a bank that'll finance it first and then we'll talk.
Unfortunately, we don't have politicians, or the three of us in Parliament. I mean, some people might say that's a good thing, but we don't have people in Parliament that say, no, let's stick with coal. Let's go back to what we had. So it does look inevitable that we will have nuclear energy here in Australia at some point, especially if we do get a Liberal government. It seems, at least at this stage at the moment. If we take somewhere like Liddell and we say, okay, we're going to build a nuclear power station at the site of Liddell, how much crossover is there with the actual goings on that happens in the plant? So you obviously had a lot of people working at the coal plant. Can they step into a nuclear plant and do a lot of the same sorts of things? Like at the end of the day, the way I understand power generation is you have a coil, so you have a magnet with coils around it. You want to spin a turbine, and a lot of that's just heating up water and producing steam. So obviously the energy generation is different, but the other parts of the plant are very much the same. Am I on the right track with that? Is there a lot of crossover with coal and nuclear plants?
Yeah, 100%. So the only main difference between coal-fired and nuclear is that coal, you're burning something. You're burning the coal in a boiler to make heat, which then goes through a steam drum, which that's where you get your steam. The steam goes and drives your steam turbine and expands through into the condenser and spins the wheel as it goes. And that's connected to a spinning electromagnet. That's where your electricity comes from. If you're going to heat the water with a fission reaction or a chemical reaction by burning coal, the end result's the same. So there's not much differences in the plant itself. You wouldn't have the mine, but then I'd argue that the coal could probably be exported as well. So I'd take a cheeky punt on that. But inside the plant, you're right. You've got pumps, you've got valves, you've got dampers, you've got control systems, you've got switchboards, all the same stuff, right? Rotating equipment, electrical equipment, mechanical equipment, all that stuff is, it comes out of the same shelf in the supermarket. Basically, you just put it together the same, and there's only a few components that are different.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's interchangeable, Stephen. Like that's what you're trying to get at. Like you don't have to actually,
because they're talking about, we're going to close down a coal plant, and those workers can be repurposed for, wind projects or solar projects, like mowing the lawn.
They're going to go to India and he's trying to sell solar to you every phone call.
Give all those highly skilled sort of mechanical operators that work in coal-fired power stations. Give them a battery drill and a packet of tech screws, and they can go and build solar farms. So I'm sure they'd appreciate that.
Yeah, they're gonna love it.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Get paid $30 an hour instead of $80 an
hour. Yeah. But see, I mean, there's so much to lose by going down this path, but I don't know where we're heading. I think. Do you think it's getting to a point where people are starting to wake up or change and change the tune? Do you think it's moving in a different direction, or are we still headed down this renewable path?
Both. Where it's a big ship to turn around, but people are waking up. So obviously, you guys are happy to talk about it. There's been a few others happy to talk about it. I've got my own space where I talk about it. I think I'm an optimist, so I describe myself as an optimist, hoping I'll be right. I describe the climate doomers as pessimists, hoping they'll be right. There's a slight difference there.
I want it to end.
Yeah, they do, to be proven right. So I think there's factions everywhere. So even within the nuclear guys, there's factions that just want the baseload and to sort it all out and be done with it in that sort of technical and economic sense. There's also a faction who are very focused on the climate solutions. And I say to them, the rare occasion when I do talk to people about that stuff, I say, look, guys, you don't want to try and sell me a car that has wheels. You don't want to sell me a power station with no emissions, because everyone's going to go, well, I can get that from wind and solar and it's a lot cheaper. Go away. You have to win on the cost argument. And to win on the cost argument, you have to unpick renewables are cheaper. So that myth has to be, exploded into its component bits and talked about factually and logically. Then you also have to point out that you need to go back to a baseload system. So that means that your nuclear guys shouldn't be going, I'm friends with renewables, because they're not, because the renewables are not friends with anybody. They will destroy everyone in their path and salt the earth, and that's their game, right? They are not interested in sharing. That's as nicely as I can put it. The
earth is right. So the concrete powder.
For the nuclear guys to win this argument and in a genuine way, and not just by voting someone in and then they take central planning control and do their captain's picks, we have to go back to the basics, and we have to get the basics right. So the basics have to be, what is the cheapest possible system, electricity supply system that we can have that gives us, an acceptable amount of reliability and an acceptable amount of cost. Now, we had that 15 years ago. And then there was all sorts of other stuff going on as well. There's the gold plating of the networks and all that kind of stuff. But we're basically there. And then we had to work out how to. There was the privatization. So there's a really interesting argument that needs to be had across the whole sector about what level of government ownership and what level of private ownership is had in these critical systems. So do we want the Chinese government owning half of our transmission networks? If someone wants to look at who owns what, then you can go to the Australian Energy Regulator's State of the Energy Market report, where they list out who owns what, and you might get a surprise. how much of this privatized stuff is actually owned by overseas companies who, at some stage in the future might not have our best interests at heart. So that's a bit of a worry. So there's all in terms of this critical infrastructure, and it's so critical, it's beyond critical. I mean, when the power goes out, you guys understand intimately, as I do. I have kids. Steve, congratulations, new baby. Power goes out, boom, no fridge. What the hell do you do? No microwave. I've been there, done that, and people survived for a long time without electricity, but it wasn't a great existence. It wasn't pleasant. And now we're in this situation where our society has not just come along and plonked electricity and, oh, look at us go. We've evolved along with it. We're not just using it, we're dependent on it. And when you're dependent on it, you can't be blasé. You can't take it for granted. So we need to take it seriously and have these grown up conversations. And net zero is not a thing. I would just say that it's not going to happen anywhere ever.
But can we give up on coal? Like, can we have a resurgence in the popularity of coal, or is it too far along? Is it too far gone?
No, I think it's not going to be it doesn't need to win a popularity contest in that sense. It just needs the bureaucracies to tell the facts and do the right message. So I put a lot of blame on CSIRO and AMO for propagating these myths that this is all going to work and it's going to be nice and easy. I mean, in their reports, if you read them, they use words like, oh, this is like a once in a lifetime transition, my favorite word. But it's worse than that. It's not even going to happen the way they think it's going to happen. They haven't acknowledged that yet. So these organizations who are entrusted to manage these things need to wake up. Whether the politicians can put a scare into them and say, look, this is not working well, and you guys are on the firing line. I just see. I mean, I see the chair of the CEO of AMO, Daniel Westerman, came into the job a couple of years ago and started going on about 100% renewables. And then I noticed that, not long after that, he had to shut down the market because it wasn't working. And I would be surprised if he ever says that again, to be honest. I think his reality is catching up with him. One of the catchphrases you hear around abouts on these things is mugged by reality. And I think that's what's happening. We're not going to get net zero in any shape or form. We all know what zero is, but what does net mean? Well, there's a lot of wiggle room in net. I'd say that net zero is it's not even a pipe dream. It's a physical impossibility. It's physically impossible. I'll go on record as saying that. No worries at all. The great white hope of all this, which no one really talks about how we're meant to get to net zero, but if you go through the Turnbull government and the Morrison government, who eventually agreed to it, their roadmaps rely on hydrogen. So hydrogen as a product is fantastic in its niche markets, where it's used as rocket fuel and as coolant in generators and a couple other things. As anything, and it's very expensive to make because mostly it comes from natural gas. H2 is the chemical name for the hydrogen gas, and CH4 is methane. So strip out the carbon and you get a few hydrogen atoms. Trying to get hydrogen from H2O, water, you could do that via electrolysis. So you put pure water, very pure water, through your membrane, and then you put electricity through it, and you get oxygen and hydrogen. And that's all you get. So you destroy the water. That water's gone. 9 kilograms of water for every kilogram of hydrogen. And this is in what we described as one of the driest continents. So we're off to a good start there. And Alan Finkel has been quoted as saying, hydrogen is like exporting our sunshine because, we'll make all the electricity for free from solar panels. and we'll get all this free green hydrogen that we'll send overseas and everyone will buy it. But this is another just entirely, I don't know, it's optimistic to the point where it's ridiculous. So anyone who thinks they're going to use hydrogen is not going to want to transport it, because if you need to transport it, if you're going to liquefy it, you need to get it down to minus 253. And if you remember high school chemistry, absolute zero is minus 273 degrees C. I think methane turned into LNG at something like minus 160. So you've got to, basically do that again, add another 80, take another 80 degrees out of it. So that's a refrigeration plant that's probably about 5 times the size of Curtis Island to get about a quarter of the output. This is how ridiculous it is. And the electricity consumption. So there's a white paper by GE, General Electric. They make a lot of turbines of all sorts, have done for years, big company. Actually, we're watching reruns of 30 Rock at the moment with Jack Donaghy. Wow. He's GE, Six Sigma, all that stuff. But GE's white paper talks about the amount of electricity required to make the hydrogen through electrolysis and how much electricity you get out of a gas turbine if it's burning 100% hydrogen. So the ratio is about 5 to 1. You get 20% of the electricity out of the gas turbine generator burning hydrogen of the electricity you used to make the hydrogen in the first place. Now, no one in the world is going to do that. It's just so stupid. It's like you got to build all the wind farms and solar farms across the paddocks. Then you got to transmit it all into these electrolyzers and all the water with the Demian plants, all the rest of it. Then you got to convert it into hydrogen. Then you got to stick it in a ship at either minus 253 degrees C, which is incredibly expensive, or you got to turn it into ammonia, which is also not cheap. Then you got to ship it. Then you got to convert it back to something else, stick it in a gas turbine, and get 20% of the electricity out of it. It's terrible.
You know what? You know that was 3 minutes or 4 minutes of explaining the hydrogen process, and you had me at it destroys the water.
Yeah.
All right. So what I'm saying is, like, so you know, like, so don't worry about all that other stuff that you're talking about. We have so much water on this planet, and to convert it to electricity, you're going to destroy it. Now, answer me this: it doesn't destroy the water when you evaporate it to turn it into steam to turn a turbine, because it just goes back up in the atmosphere, condenses, and then guess what? Still there, comes back as rain, beauty, and we can grow plants with it.
You're right. So, you're right, Adam. You're on the right track. I do need to, for your viewers, someone out there will be ranting and going, he's wrong. But the bit you're right in that. Yeah, obviously steam evaporates and turns back into rain. That's no problem. But in a thermal power station, like a coal-fired power station or a nuclear, that steam cycle is actually closed. That's a very pure water, because when you turn water into steam, all the impurities will come out into the turbine blades. So what you actually want to do is have very pure water. So that is never lost unless you have a leak, or if your safety relief valves go off and it goes into the air then. But the cooling towers that you see, the steam that's going up into the air, that's from the cooling towers. So that's a completely different. You've got your thermal circuit over here, but then you've got a cooling circuit over here, and they're completely different cycles. So you can have cooling water that gets evaporated, turns into rain, rain falls back down, no losses there. Or you can put it through, if it's beside a river or a lake, you can pump that cool water through it and put it back in. So that's just a minor technical point there, but you're right. The every time you see an image of a power station, a thermal power station, they'll have all these billowing clouds of steam coming up everywhere.
Yeah.
It's steam, mate. It's, okay, steam's a greenhouse gas. Okay, fair enough.
Oh, because it traps a little bit of heat because it's moisture. That's all. But the Earth does. It's a natural cycle anyway, because water evaporates out of natural bodies of water and goes up into the atmosphere and causes rain anyway. And when we've debunked it, it's a part of the cooling system of the planet anyway. So,
but hydrogen's not a natural product. Not really. Not if you got to split the atom to split molecules to get it.
well, you've got to split it and take it out of the water and then destroy the water, which we all need anyway. So that's a limited supply. So it makes no sense to me anyway. Anyway, I know we're getting close to the, we're at the hour and 35-minute mark, but that was, you had me at destroying the water, and hell no, I don't want to do that. So hydrogen doesn't seem like the way to go.
It's not. It's a terrible idea.
Sounds like a good T-shirt. Hydrogen destroys water.
Yeah, we should
green
do
hydrogen
it.
does.
Candidates
Green
one, Stephen.
Yeah, we'll do one. We'll
We'll
write
do
that
one.
down somewhere.
As a quote.
But look, Ben, thank you for coming on tonight. We really appreciate it. We've been very fortunate to have some very intelligent people come on this podcast throughout the years, and they all have the same demeanor that you do. They're very rational. They can explain any question that we ask, and they're generally optimistic about humanity and the planet and everything like that. Why can't we just get politicians to get on the same tram, and all these bureaucrats and everything like that? I suspect maybe some vested interests are involved, or whatever it might be. But we've got a final segment on the show. It's called Build Your Own Fantasy Government. Now, you may not want to get too political, but it's we're putting it out there. It's you're more than welcome to have a go at this. But the idea is that you, Ben, are in charge of the next Parliament of Australia, and you can choose 5 or 6 people to head up the next government. They can be current politicians, former politicians, living or dead, experts in a certain field. It could be a next door neighbor. It could be anyone you choose, but you're in control. 5 or 6 people. Who do you pick?
Jeepers. I'll start selecting from the current crop of pollies. Matt Canavan's good. If you could get him on your show, he's good value, and he knows his stuff because he was a resources minister as well, and he takes the time to go out to coal mines and see what goes on. The haters give him stick for it, but good on him, I say. He's doing a good job. I'd like to see the people in cabinet who have a bit of experience in their sector and have a clear interest in the best outcomes for the country. It's a tough call. I think obviously from my viewpoints, I'm probably considered by some to be a right-wing nut job. So
we all are, don't worry.
I'll wear that. If that means I think for myself, and I'm skeptical of everything, then so be it. I'll take it. I think, Canavan would be good in energy and related fields and resources, just because he's got so much practical knowledge on it and he wants the right outcomes. I think Alex Antic is saying some really good things about privacy and free speech. He's pretty good in that respect. I'd actually, people will probably have a go at me for saying I'd give Pauline a go somewhere. I reckon she deserves it by now. I mean, she went to jail for all this, and she's still there. And if you tried to find someone tougher, I reckon you'd have to go a long way before you find someone tougher than Pauline. I think she'd given some responsibility, I think she'd polish up all right. Yeah, there'd be a diamond under there somewhere. That's 3. I don't know. I think, who else is there? Colin would be all right, but I think he's a little bit green at the federal stuff yet. Maybe someone from outside politics.
Yeah.
Yeah. God, it's been so long since what's a good business leader? Someone who's sort of. What about one of those Kennard guys?
Oh, yeah. Kennard's hire guys.
Yeah. What about one of them? Like in
Dick Smith still floating around somewhere.
Oh, Dick, you'd have to give Dick a shot. He's pretty good. He's pretty good. Yeah. He might be a little bit too green for my liking, but I think he'd have the. He's smart enough to make good decisions. I would say that, and honest enough. So I think that's even if people are ideologically opposed to the things that I'm opposed to, if they want the best for the country and they're smart, and humble as well. So that's my 3 criteria. So there you go. Canavan, Antic, Pauline, Kennard, and Gig.
Well, that
Hey,
would be some
could work.
country. I tell you what.
We might get somewhere then.
I
All
feel
right,
like
mate, well-
I feel like they'd have Australia's best interests at heart. I think those people that you're talking about do have Australia's best interest at heart, and I think that's the only way that this country's ever going to pick up its socks and get out really into the world is by having people who give actually a crap about it.
Yeah, I said it. I said this to someone today in a chat group, but I'd much prefer to be saying in 1 decade I helped fix it than saying in 3 decades I told you so.
Yep. That's a
That
good
would be a bad outcome.
Good way to maybe wrap things up. But thank you again for coming on. If people want to reach out to you or follow you somehow, what's the best way to do that?
They could follow me on the Twitter's probably the easiest. My messages are open. I get messages all the time. Mostly good questions, right? People just want to know stuff, and I'm down with that. So maybe as time goes, we'll be one of the Australian energy consumer will be one of the most highly educated on the planet, and I think that's what it might take to get out of this hole we're digging.
Yeah. And
So the more questions, the better.
I put up the Spotify for your podcast. Is that the only place to get it, or is it around in other places as well?
Oh, thanks. Spotify's fine, but it goes out through whatever the RSS feeds are. So it's on iTunes. It's on all of them.
Could be anywhere. If it's on the RSS feed, it could be anywhere.
I've got a Lonely Odd profile on Locals as well. Just hoping one day.
You got to put it out there. But look, mate, thanks again. I think Adam, we learned a bit tonight, and we covered some good issues. I'm sure there's a hell of a lot more that we could talk about. It's really disappointing that we're at this point in time. I think we should have left things the way they were with our energy system. But look, we just have to keep pushing forward and keep trying to get some information out there. But for everyone watching, thank you also. Thank you for everyone that contributed to the chat as well. It's much appreciated. Please share this out. I say it every single time. We really rely on our audience to share these interviews because that's the only way that they can really get out there. So please share, and catch us next time. We'll be back again next Sunday. Thank you, Adam. Thank you again, Ben. And thank you to the audience. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks. See ya.